So did you have a question specific for Matt?
I mean, I'm fine with just asking any person who accepts divine command meta-ethics, how do they make sense of that position given the Euthyphro dilemma? So I'm fine with anyone trying to answer that. I would be interested to hear.
Well, define your terms for us. Give us
Sure.
your yeah.
So what I mean by the Euthyphro dilemma, divine command meta-ethics, I should start with that first. Divine command meta-ethics is our moral frameworks are predicated upon God's existence, or a belief in the God of theism. However, I think that there are a lot of reasons why this falls apart, but the classic reason is related to the Euthyphro dilemma. Now, the Euthyphro dilemma takes it that, okay, you want to say that God commands X is good. Like, for example, love thy neighbor. God commands love thy neighbor. But the Euthyphro dilemma asks, does God command us to love thy neighbor or whatever because it is good, or is loving thy neighbor good because God commands it?
Yeah, and right. Matt has an article called I think it's the Euthyphro dilemma, to show that atheism has the problem. The actual problem that you have with the Euthyphro dilemma is a lack of understanding of Christian theology. Okay, we get our morals from the nature of God, not by the commands of God. Okay, so the atheists have a problem with a Euthyphro dilemma because of the fact that they can't explain good or evil, because they have no standard by which to do that. We're just chemical reactions. You can't explain how there can be evil. Evil's a real big problem. So is goodness for atheists. They have no standard. You can't have a standard. And so, but by trying to put the standard as a question of the commands of God, whether you need to require God to give the commands or the commands make it good, is a logical fallacy called a fallacy of equivocation, because you're misusing the terms. So the proper definition of where we get our morals from is the nature of God, not the commands of God. And that would be the issue.
Well, see, the reason why I wanted to bring it up, because I imagine you guys are well aware of the Euthyphro dilemma. However, it doesn't seem like people, when they appeal to the third horn, which is goodness, or God's nature is comprised of good-making properties. Goodness is grounded in God's nature, pretty much what you said. When that's claimed, we can ask a question like, why doesn't God command we torture puppies or something? And it seems like a reasonable response to that would be, well, God's nature, it would go against God's nature to command such a thing, because God's nature has good making properties like compassion, lovingness, caring, justice, that kind of thing. But if it's because of these good-making properties, then it seems like we could just redo the Euthyphro dilemma and ask, are these traits themselves good because God has them? Or does God have these traits because they're good? And so it seems like the first thing renders it arbitrary, and the latter thing renders it appeals to a standard of good outside of God.
No, it doesn't. That's the whole thing. As long as you start with a straw man, then the answer to that is yes.
I'm not sure why it doesn't.
Okay, how do you have a definition of good that's based, that is defined by the nature of God, and yet it's outside the nature of God?
Well, I explained how. I explained that if it's, I mean, God's nature is made up of different good-making properties.
No, this is right there. Okay, back up. That's your straw man right there.
God doesn't have good-making properties. He's not compassionate or just or loving.
God doesn't have good-making properties. God is good. By definition, by the fact of who he is the standard of what you call good. You cannot know what good is apart from God.
God is good. Are you saying goodness? God means good, or what exactly are you're describing God's nature again, right?
No, I'm describing the nature of goodness. That's the problem. So when
but
you
if
talk
it's
about
in terms
goodness,
of God, I don't see how it's not. It just seems like a tautology.
Okay, when you talk about good,
Yeah.
what's your standard?
Well, that's what I'm asking you. I'm asking you,
so
how do you account for the possibility that there's an independent standard, right? Like, it seems to me,
Okay, so what's the independent
it seems
standard?
to me like you actually run into another issue by saying God is good, because then we can ask, well, given that, what are we supposed to do with that information?
Hold on. You can't. What is this independent standard if it's not the nature of God?
Well, I mean, that is, people can posit different independent standards. I think the meat of the issue stems from your inability to like cover the Euthyphro dilemma. It doesn't matter what I think goodness is. That won't help you establish an independent standard, right?
So what we have is, as long as you can keep moving a stick around, you can say it's not in a set location. As long as you can keep changing a definition, you can say it does, that it has the problem. But as long as you're going to, every time you're going to say that, I'm going to say, well, what's your standard? You can't answer that. Why? Because without God, you cannot have a standard of what defines good. So there is no.
Yeah, but what is your answer to my reformulation of the Euthyphro dilemma, which undermines your claim that, well, God's nature is good? How is it a straw man, though?
Because he doesn't have good making properties, and he doesn't have goodness that's external to him. It's a wrong definition.
It's wrong because it's wrong.
No, that's not what I said. I said it's wrong because it's a wrong definition. You said it's wrong because it's wrong. So that's twice that I've pointed out the, a logic in your arguments. One, you're building the straw man on the nature of good, and two, you're building a straw man on what I just said. Now, that's called dishonesty.
Why exactly is it a straw man? Because you haven't really established that. Instead, you've just attacked me personally. Like, I would be interested in hearing your.
What did I say? Okay, that's a third straw man.
Could you please explain to me why it is the case that you're not saying something that's empty by saying God is good?
Because you used the wrong definition. That's the very thing of what a straw man is. You want to continue to use a definition different than the one we're using. Even when I define it for you, you give a different definition. And
you defined goodness in terms of God's nature, yes?
Okay.
Is that the case?
You asked a question. I'm trying to answer. You want to cut me off?
Go ahead, please. I'm sorry. There's a lag. Sorry.
Okay. When I say it's a straw man, that's not an attack of the person. That's not an ad hominem attack. An ad hominem attack is if I said, you're an idiot, therefore your argument is not valid. That's not what I said. I said your argument is a straw man because it has a false definition that you're using. You're using a definition that's, even after I gave you the definition, you then continue to use a false definition. That is what a straw man argument is. Pointing out that you're using a straw man argument is not a personal attack.
That's not what I was referring to, but it's irrelevant. Did I explain your definition correctly the last time I mentioned it?
No, and I pointed that out.
Would you mind explaining it to me again then? Because I don't see how you're not claiming that goodness is defined in virtue of God's nature.
I am saying it's by the nature of God. That's not what you said when you said that he has good-making properties and that he has goodness that's external to him.
What makes up God's nature?
What makes up God's nature is the fact that he has certain attributes that he has. So the issue that you want to get into is you're trying to say there's a standard that can be external to God.
I'm saying that's one of the horns of the dilemma, right?
For an atheist, yes.
I mean, atheists, everyone has an issue in trying to understand their meta ethics. It seems to me like you don't like the phrase "great making properties." That's fine. The argument still runs when we just consider the attributes that you said God has, right? I mean, are these attributes themselves good because God has them, or does God have these attributes because they're good?
I'll point out again, when you ask the question good, you have a straw man. You cannot answer what good is apart from God. When you tried, what did you do? You had to say, well,
I'm showing how that doesn't work, though.
I know, for an atheist, it doesn't work.
It doesn't work for you. You're the one who's positing that.
For me, because I'm not using a bogus argument like you are. I'm not using some straw man.
I'm not understanding how you're addressing the Euthyphro dilemma.
Because, you're attributing goodness to the standard itself. So tell me this: how can you have an inch apart from an inch? Define for me an inch apart from an inch.
Yeah, inches are defined in virtue of the measurement that we've established an inch to be. The problem is that it seems to me like you're positing an account of moral realism, the existence of objective morality predicated upon a meaningless tautology. It's also the case that if you're saying God is good, therefore we ought to adhere to God's commands. Is that something?
This is. I'll say it again.
We shouldn't adhere to God's commands.
It's not that we say God is good. It's that we say you cannot know good apart from God. You could not define what is good without having God's nature. To know, there is no definition of good.
So we ought to follow God's commands. Is that what you're saying?
You proved it. When I asked you by what standard of you would have good, you said that we make it up on our own, basically. So everyone could have their own standard of good, and therefore, if Muslims want to kill people because they call it good, you can't say they're wrong. So therefore, you have no standard. Once you put aside any absolute standard, which is what I understand you want to try to do. But once you do that, you have no standard, and now you don't have good. And so you want to start with that, but you cannot define good apart from God's nature, apart from who God is. So you're trying to put the cart before the horse, and you want to define God by goodness. And that's a straw man, because we define goodness by God. That's the problem that you have.
When you redo the Euthyphro dilemma against the claim that God is the standard of goodness, you're asking whether or not the reasons why God is the standard are the standard for goodness in virtue of them being good, which would be independent, or in virtue of God's choosing them, or them comprising God's nature. This is it's a dilemma that's being asked of you. It's not being posited by me personally. This is something that's been posited
there's no more
in ancient times.
When I correct you continually and you continue to go back to this, it becomes a problem.
Well, you haven't addressed it, so could you maybe you should answer the other questions I've asked, like why ought we follow God's commands?
Why do we follow God's commands? Because he created us and he is good by his nature. That is how we know what goodness is. So when you ask your question, is God good? The answer is, how do you define good apart from God?
Yeah, again, when that's asked, we can use the Euthyphro dilemma to question the view that we can only understand goodness in virtue of God's nature. But
How?
I don't understand how you're actually not committing the naturalistic fallacy if you're saying God's nature is good, so we ought to follow God's commands.
Because I'm not using a different standard for two different things. So let me ask you this. Can you explain to me?
Wait, hold on. I asked a question. I didn't understand the answer you just gave.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask it so you can
Okay,
understand.
go ahead.
So can you explain to me how many pounds, how many inches, better yet, how many inches is 8 gallons of water weigh?
I understand that that's an absurd question to ask. You think that it's absurd?
Now I'm just going to put it back on you. And you're
No, you said that we're moving on from the Euthyphro dilemma. I asked you why ought we follow God's commands, and so far it seems like you gave
he gave the commands. Why should we not? I mean, you don't have to. You clearly don't, and you can, you'll end up facing him as judge. Why do you obey the laws of the land? Do you actually?
Yeah, but are you? I'm sorry. Sorry about the lag, and I imagine it's very annoying. I apologize. It seems to me like you want to say this is how you can derive your standard of goodness. So it doesn't matter whether or not I follow these commands.
You've told
I
me.
feel like you haven't really addressed the claim that it's committing the naturalistic fallacy, or it's breaking Hume's law, if you will.
So you
cannot derive normativity from descriptive claims.
Okay. So you like to go on a lot of different tangents, but the reality is
I've been staying with this one objection the whole time. What are you unsure about that's keeping you from answering?
You have ignored the answer I've given you. You've told me what I believe.
Dilemma. This isn't the Euthyphro dilemma.
Okay. So this is how we're gonna end up doing it. I will mute you and I will just talk. Because this, the way this works is that you don't talk over me here, because I've explained this several times. You want to keep arguing for something I'm not saying. You want to tell me what I believe. You want to tell me what I'm saying when I corrected you at least 4 times. And you want to keep telling me that I don't understand what you're saying, because you won't accept what I actually am saying. So that's a problem. Now, the reality is that you're asking, why should we follow God's commands? Because he is the creator. Okay, that's why, because he created us. And that's why we obey him, because he is the judge that we're accountable to. We're accountable to God as our creator. That's the reason. All right?
Might makes right.
No, that would be atheism that teaches that.
You've just explained how, because God is, he possesses the attributes you just described, we ought to obey him.
Okay.
But that just sounds like it's my...
That is not what I said.
Every time... Okay, continue.
That is not what I said. Okay? I didn't mention his attributes at all. And this was what tells me that you're not being honest.
Why should we obey God's commands?
Because he created us. Notice I didn't mention his goodness at all, did I?
Okay, he has different attributes that aren't related. No, you didn't. But you're appealing to his ability to create life, right?
Okay.
God has powers beyond... Hold on, I wasn't finished talking. God has powers...
Well, we can do it this way then. And you could talk all you want, but no one's going to hear you. So this is going to be the thing. When when I ask a question, you're going to answer. And if you're not going to answer, you're not going to continue. It's just that simple. Okay. This isn't your show. You don't get to make the rules here. So I'm going to ask you to repeat back what I said, because if you do repeat it properly and you say it wrong again, then we're going to know you're being purposefully dishonest. So why is it that I said we should obey God?
Or is my audio okay? You said one of the reasons is because he created us. It seems to me like that's appealing to God's abilities. God has abilities
it doesn't matter.
that
It doesn't
allow
matter
us.
how.
Like,
hold on. It
you
doesn't matter
muted me and then lowered my volume. Now you're talking over me when I'm trying to answer. Would you mind if I answer? Because I don't think
add to what I've said and start to try to build your straw man.
No, see, I don't think you understand how this is going about. It seems to me like you are making claims and I am arguing that these claims lead to
what it is
lead to positions that you don't want to hold.
No, what I'm doing is
you're saying I am giving us
I'm making claims you don't, that doesn't fit what you want to try to argue with your straw man. So you have to make it fit. And you just did that. You gave a perfect example. I asked you to redefine, to state exactly what I said. You redefined it. You said one of the reasons.
It's not because
it wasn't one of the reasons.
So,
and then you went off to give a reason of what it is I mean by what I say that's different than what I say.
No, I think I understand where you're confused. In virtue of God's creating us, I see that as an issue, and I try to explain. Do you understand why I posit it is?
It doesn't matter how you see it. It matters how I see it when you're asking me what I believe.
Why is what I said not an issue?
Okay, I'll just mute you and we'll continue it that way. When you ask me a question and I give you an answer and you tell me what I mean by my answer and I tell you you're wrong, and then you tell me that you know better than me, well, we're done here because you're not being honest. If you want to know what it is I'm believing, you ask me. And I tell you, when you're not willing to accept the definition and the explanations I give, then you, sir, I'm sorry, have a straw man. That's not a personal attack to tell you that. And it's not me not answering your question as you're trying to say now. It's me answering your question, but your question's invalid and you don't like it because you think you got me with your dilemma. That is only a dilemma for the atheist. Because in this dilemma requires God's nature to be outside of his nature, to be external. And that's the issue is, how do you define good? That's the issue. We've gone longer than we had planned. And I know Matt had to drop out and couldn't get back in. So we could pick this up if you'd like to discuss this again with Matt next week. That's fine. But the thing I'll tell you is, when you're having a dialogue with someone and you ask them to define things and they do, then please do not tell them what they mean by that. And when corrected, continue to tell them that they don't understand what they believe. I understand that you're stuck with having to deal with the fact that there is an absolute standard of goodness, and it's God's nature. It's who God is. That's completely separate from why we follow his commands. We follow his commands not because he's good. And that's where your dilemma.
I didn't say that. I appealed to you saying because he created us, and you haven't addressed the argument I rendered.
To redefine what I meant.
You haven't addressed
that it's his goodness.
No, again, I'm appealing to something that ultimately seems like God's power, his abilities that are beyond our abilities. And I'm over wrong. Goodness. You're sticking it. It seems to me like, well, why is it that God's ability to create us means we ought to follow his commands? I've asked this question a few times. Do you understand?
And I've answered it a few times, because he created us and we're accountable to him.
Because he created us, we should. Okay. I don't see how that's not an appeal to God having abilities beyond ours, and how it's not. It seems to me like that's just might makes right. God has the ability to create us. Because he created us, we ought to listen to what he says.
Do you support abortion? Do you believe in a woman's right to choose?
What about my answer did you not
I'm
agree
asking
with?
I asked you a question for a reason. Do you believe in a woman's right to choose?
Yes.
Okay. So thank you for your inconsistency, because you just argued for might makes right. A woman can do what she wants with another human being because she has in a greater position, and her decisions is might make right. So if you think that might makes right is invalid, then my suggestion is you should not be supporting abortion. Okay? Abortion, there's no separation between saying that a woman's right to choose, that it's her body. There's no difference between that and saying this is my property that was argued in slavery. You know what the difference actually is? Abortion always ends in murder of the person that's weaker, where in slavery it didn't. So we're going to end the show with that. The reality is when someone, for folks who are watching or listening, this is the dilemma you have. The dilemma is when someone tries to argue something and they cannot answer with reality, as we have with Joe here. He doesn't want to deal with what I'm actually saying and continues to go back to arguments that I'm not saying, and to try to appeal to that. That's not being honest, and it's building a straw man. And when he argued that me saying that is an attack of the person, that again is not what it is. Or maybe it's maybe he doesn't understand what an ad hominem attack is. I don't know. But the reality is, if folks want to have honest discussion, they have to be, well, honest. And when you tell someone what they believe, they correct you and you continue to do it, that's not being honest. Okay? If you're going to take people at their word and what they say they believe and their use of language, and when someone says, as Joe said, when I said this is what I mean by what I say, and he says, no, I think you mean this, I think I know better what I mean. So with that, we're going to close out. I want to encourage folks to continue to go. You can continue the dialogue on BibleThumpingWingnut.com. There is a link there under Slick Answers for tonight's show. You can continue to add comments there and dialogue there. That will be up for people to continue. You can continue to go to Bible Thumping Wingnut, check out all that is available, all the podcasts. They have several podcasts other than this one, which is Slick Answers. You have the original Bible Thumping Wingnut, Super Referendum Radio. You have Conversations from the Porch, Shine as Lights, Logical Belief, a lot of new ones being added. So with that, there will be an after show that usually we have by the guys from the Google of Council Plus, and I will drop that link in here. If you want to watch the after show, what you want to do is go to the Bible Thumping Wingnut YouTube page, and shortly after the ending of this, we're going to have a new video pop up, and you can be watching there. So thanks for watching and listening, and just as a reminder to be paying attention to all that goes on at Bible Thumping Wingnut, and it is a ministry of striving for eternity. Thanks for watching, listening, and for everyone asking their questions. We thank Matt for his time and his work at carm.org.